Kind of an interesting day for weather, isn't it?
Yeah.
Did the wind wake you up this morning?
No. I'm like
Yeah, but
about
she usually turns it on.
Turns on the lights, unless you didn't have lights. So. Well, welcome. This museum is here to help you learn about the history of the place where you're living now. So, local history is 3rd grade. What kind of history do you study next year, do you know? You get to study the state of California. And then, what after that? What do you study in 5th grade, do you think, for history? Yes?
Well, also in 4th grade, you also go visit the missions.
That's right, because that's part of California history, the missions. And that's the part that everybody remembers. Yes, did you have a question?
Yeah.
Okay, so what do you study in 5th grade, do you know? You study U.S. history, the United States, so it just keeps getting bigger. And then you study world history, and then you kind of start over again, California, U.S., world history. And history's kind of interesting if it's important to you, if there's something about it that makes sense to you. If it's just studying dates and things like that, it's like, history's boring. But history can be fun. Yes?
The desk over there, my after school has like 20 of those.
The desk?
Yeah.
Yeah, that desk, actually, I'm dating myself, but when I first went to school, we had desks like that. It wasn't a very rich school. It had cool because you notice that the desk is on the back part and the seat's on the front part. So all you did was you put another one in front of you, and then you had a desk in front of your chair, and then they had a chair, and it just kept going that way. The last one in the line didn't have a chair, and the first one in the line didn't have a desk, but it worked out just fine. If you got in trouble, you had to go sit in the first seat right in front of the teacher so she could keep her eye on you. So that's what those kind of desks were all about. They also had inkwells. You see a hole there? They didn't have ballpoint pens. Ballpoint pens were invented in my lifetime. And so you had to have a pen that you dipped in ink and then you wrote with it. And you had blotters and things. And boys took girls' pigtails and stuck them in the ink, and it was a mess. Anyway, so those are little historic things about the way that I grew up and the way that people grew up before me. So things have changed a lot. So we're going to talk about Aptos, but it applies to all of Santa Cruz, and it applies to most of the Monterey Bay area, all the way up to San Francisco. If we look at this map right here, that's San Francisco. This is the San Francisco Bay. This is Monterey Bay, and we live right here. And you see this line that goes all the way around it. That's where the people who lived in Aptos, that's where they lived. So, who knows anything about Aptos? Anything historic about where you live? Something old? Yes?
The cement ship, and I saw a piece of it.
All right, good for you. So do you know anything about the cement ship?
Well, I know that my mom's friend's dad, I know that he used to dance on the cement ship.
Yeah. Yes?
You were able to walk on it, and it's actually made of, the cement ship's actually made of like concrete and something else. And
Good.
They docked it on there, and then they sold it for, I don't remember how much, but, and then it just got stuck there, and then it stayed there for years, and then they made it a ball, and then you could just like dance on there, or just walk on there, and then after they closed it, and then
Yes, we're going to talk about the cement ship. The cement ship was actually an oil tanker made for World War I.
Yeah.
That goes back almost 100 years, back 100 years. But they didn't finish it in time. Why do you think they made it out of cement? Yes?
Because cement's really hard, and you have a hard time sinking it.
Okay, that's a good idea. But there was what are ships normally made out of today? Yes.
Wood.
No.
Or like what's it called?
Yes.
Metal.
Yes, steel. Okay. But like steel doesn't float, does it?
It's if it's hollow.
Yeah.
The rounded bottom does. When it's round on the bottom, it'll float.
The reason it floats, you're right, is because as heavy as that ship is, the weight of the water that it pushes out of the way, the water's even heavier, so the ship's lighter than the water that it displaces. Kind of a weird thing to think of, that steel floats, right? So cement floats too, but only if it pushes water out of the way. If it breaks, it sinks like a rock, just like steel ships sink. Yes?
I have a question about those pictures.
Well, then ask away.
How did they take a picture if I don't think pictures were invented in that time?
You're right, they were.
How did they like take a picture then?
They're drawings. They're very good drawings.
Wow.
Yeah.
They look real.
Yeah, they do. This one's not a drawing, this is a picture.
Yeah. How did they do it?
So let's talk about the first people who lived here. Does anybody know who the first people were and what they were called? Yes.
The Ohlone?
The Ohlone, yes. And who named them? Did they name themselves?
We named them?
The people who lived over near Yosemite named them. So Ohlone means the people over there. Means the people of the West. Because, you know, if you go to Fresno or you go to Modesto or places like that, it's hot, right? And in the winter, it's cold. And so they'd come over here because this was a good place to hang out. So this has always been a vacation spot. Trouble is, back then, you had to walk. It would take days, you know, to get over here. Lots of days to get over here. But once you got here, this was the best place to take a vacation. So the people over there said, those guys were the Ohlones. So does anybody know who named Aptos? Any ideas? Yes?
The Ohlone?
Yes, they do. There are 3 places in Santa Cruz County that have Indian names. Aptos, Soquel, and Zayante. Those are all Indian names. So, does anybody have any idea what it might mean, the name Aptos? Yes?
Like, maybe like standard weather, like.
Good guess, yes?
Maybe because maybe it means like the place of the West, because if Ohlone means the people of the West, then does Aptos mean the place of the West?
No, and the reason is because the local people, the Ohlone people, they named Aptos. So it wasn't about you guys over there, it was about us right here. So this man right here lives in Watsonville. Do you think he dresses like that every day? No. He wears jeans and a baseball cap and a shirt just like this, and he looks just like anybody. But he is an Ohlone, and he comes from the Rumsian Mutsun tribe, which is south of here. So the Mutsun people lived from Watsonville out to Hollister, okay? And the Rumsian people lived along Big Sur and in Monterey. And so there are still Ohlone people around. There are no people that lived in the Aptos area or Santa Cruz area. And so the dialect of that language, we don't exactly know exact translations of it anymore. Yes, question?
Ms. Allen taught us that there are no pure Ohlones left. Is that a pure Ohlone?
No. When the Americans came from the East Coast and they started to expand the United States across the country, they fought the Indians, okay? And so they pushed the Indians into different places, even like the Cherokee, for instance. You find Cherokee people in Oklahoma because they pushed them to Oklahoma, but the Cherokee originally came from the Florida and Georgia areas. So people moved around. A lot of men came out here and they didn't have wives, so they married Indian ladies. And so it's really hard to have anybody who's absolutely pure. My parents came from Northern Ireland, but you know, they didn't marry Northern Ireland people when they got here. So it's hard to find anybody who's absolutely positively just one kind of person. Yes?
My mom's, my mom's fully Korean.
Fully Korean?
Yeah.
Oh, right, that's cool. So, I mean, we're all fully American, right? Because we were born here and we grow up here, so we could say we're fully American, but we do have roots in different places. The people who lived here call this place Aptos, and he says that all Indian people, when they named a place, it always meant the people. It means the people who live here. But we have records that say that it means where the rivers meet. Now, what rivers could they be talking about? What's the biggest river in Aptos?
The ocean?
That's not a river. Come on, man. They're called creeks, okay? So we've got one that runs through Nicene Marks, and what was that one called?
The Nicene Creek?
This is not a big stretch, folks. Come on. Yes.
The Aptos Creek?
Yes, the Aptos Creek. And what's the creek that runs down by the Polo Grounds and then right along the side of Soquel Drive and it runs into Aptos Creek? It's called?
The Soquel Creek.
It's the Valencia Creek. Okay, so those are the two big creeks, and they come together right under the freeway bridge. You know the freeway bridge where everybody slows down in the morning and they slow down in the evening because it's so scary to cross the bridge. Okay, that's where the Indians live, right there. It's where the creeks come together. So what we say is that Aptos means the people who lived where the rivers meet. So that's what your town name means. It's really special that it is an Ohlone word. Okay? Yes?
It's kind of cool that they have, you have the we are still here and then all the people from some people.
So, who knows anything about the Ohlone people? Tell me about the people that were here. Yes?
They use leather for clothes and
They what?
they had leather for clothes and they use like stone and like obsidian. They use obsidian for clothes.
Mm-hmm. Yes?
I was looking over there and I've actually been to another museum that has one of those when we got to do it. That's how they made their bread. They got some corn husks and then cut them off of the corn with like a rock blade or something, and then they put them in that big container and used the rock.
Where was that museum?
I know. Yeah, I don't know the name, but it's where the fair is. Yeah.
Where the fair is?
Yeah.
Okay, because the reason is that here there was no corn. Okay, corn comes from the East Coast. The Indians there had corn. There's a lot of difference between what you think of about the Indians on the Great Plains hunting buffalo and all that sort of stuff and the people who lived here. The people who lived here never had to fight. They didn't have wars because they had everything they needed. And people have wars because they want something that somebody else has. It's land, it's gold, it's something to fight about, okay? And usually it's religion, okay? And so that comes into play in our story, but this was like the Garden of Eden. You all know the story of Adam and Eve. They had everything they needed until they ate the apple, right? Okay, but they had everything. The Indians here had everything they needed. They didn't have to fight. Okay, did you go to the Natural History Museum yet?
Not yet.
Okay.
2 weeks.
Well, let's talk about this since you brought it up. A mortar and pestle, exactly. So this is the pestle. I always figured out, why did they call it that? And the answer is, I don't know. You do know?
Yeah.
Tell me.
I know why they called it the mortar because the pestle and the mortar, they used to like put like little dust, and they used the pestle to smash it up to make antidotes for like disease.
But where'd the name come from? That's what I thought. Okay, so did they find a rock that looked this cool?
No.
Well, how did they get this cool? Yes.
They
Did they use something like else, like to make it like a little pointy edge?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Maybe they use like a stone to like grind like the sharp pieces off.
Yeah. Yes.
I was gonna say a rock.
A rock. Another rock. Okay. So what they do is they find something that was close to what they wanted, and then they would take another rock, harder if they could find one, and they would hit it like this. You know, they wouldn't go. They just hit it, and they knew enough about stone that they could get it to shape. They could shape it by themselves with another rock. That's called knapping. When you use two rocks, when you use a rock to shape another rock, and that's how they made arrowheads. That's called flint knapping or obsidian knapping, and you break off the little tiny pieces to get the exact shape you want. There's some really cool arrowheads that you can see later when you walk around, but when you look at them, you'll see that they have little tiny curves in them and things so that they could wrap them with like a string to hold them onto the arrow. It's amazing what they could do with rocks. So we talk about different ages based on the best tools that people had. So today we would call that we live in the digital age because computers are the most powerful tools that we have right now. So if these people, this was their most powerful material that they used to make weapons and tools out of, what age did they live in? Yes.
The rock age.
The rock age.
Stone Age.
That's right, the Stone Age. So these were Stone Age people, not just the Flintstones and guys like that. You know? So Indians are Stone Age people because their tools were made out of stone. Okay. Later on, the Spanish came and they had different stuff. In fact, the Spanish, when they came, they had stuff made out of this. Does anybody know what this is?
Oh,
Yes.
I'm Mexican.
Huh?
I'm Mexican.
You're Mexican. Was that the answer to my question? Well, come on, man. What is this made of? Yes.
Steel.
No. But close. Steel is made out of this. What is it?
Metal.
What kind of metal?
Iron. Iron.
Iron, you're right.
I knew it.
You can tell it's iron because of the color. It rusts. Iron rust turns red like
Yeah.
this, okay? So that when the Spanish came, they were living in the Iron Age at the same time that the Indians were living in the Stone Age. You think that was a big advantage?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was. Okay, so these people were called hunter-gatherers. And there were hunter-gatherers all over the world up until the time that they started farming, okay? So if they were hunting and gathering, who did the hunting? Yes? The warriors. Well, yeah, that's a good answer, except,
The men did the hunting and the women did the gathering.
yes, that's correct. The men did the hunting. And I beg to differ with you about warriors because since they didn't fight all the time, just call them men. Okay, so the women did the gathering. Who else did the gathering? Yes,
Well, sometimes it's a child's.
the childs. The children, of course. If you didn't help,
The children.
if you didn't help, you didn't eat. Okay, everybody had to help. And that was the only job that they had to do every single day was getting food, right? Yes?
And the girls cook.
The girls and the women cooked, and the children cooked some of their own food too. So, do you know anything? What did the women and the children gather? What did they gather? Yes?
Corn.
Hmm?
Corn.
Remember I said they didn't have corn here. Yes?
Food.
Well, they gathered food, but what kind of food?
Oh.
Yes?
Like animals.
No. Well, sometimes yes, but basically no. That's what the hunters got. Okay. What else? Yes?
Produce.
Produce. What kinds of produce?
Like vegetables and fruit.
Vegetables and fruit. What kind of vegetables and fruit did they have here?
Oh. Apples.
No.
What?
Apples came from India. We didn't have apples here. Yes.
They had potatoes.
They didn't have potatoes.
Potatoes.
Yes.
Bananas.
Bananas. No. Come on, think about it.
Did they use acorn to make bread?
Yes. Acorns, big time. They're most. Okay, we need to keep it quiet enough to keep a conversation going. Their most important food was acorns. They would gather the acorns in the fall, put them in giant baskets to keep them from rotting, and all year long they ate acorns. So that's why those mortars were so important, because you needed that to break the acorns and then turn it into a powder. Because has anybody ever tasted an acorn?
No. I have before.
You have? Was it yummy?
No, really.
No, it's horrible. So to get rid of that horrible taste, you had to pour water through the powder, and that's what this lady's doing. She's pouring water through it 3 times to get the horrible taste away, because that horrible taste will make you sick. Okay? It's called tannin. And the tannic acid, they'd wash that out, and then they'd keep that stuff, and they would make pancakes, bread, they'd make soup, acorn soup. Well, anything that you fry up flat on a hot rock, yeah. You could call them pancakes. No waffles, there was no waffle on it. Yes?
Did they eat berries too?
Yes, they did eat berries, and especially manzanita berries. There's all kinds of things in here that you can see that they ate. They used manzanita berries to eat. They made teas out of them. They made teas out of leaves of different plants. They had a lot of different things that they ate. But the important thing is that they gathered those things. Some of them were roots. What about, what other things did they eat besides deer? What other things did they eat? Yes.
Oh, wait, I just forgot what I was going to say.
Yes?
Maybe like fish.
Yes!
they were.
These streams used to be filled with fish so big, huge fish, so many fish that when the salmon runs happened, you could wade out into the stream and you could pick them up.
Wow.
Seriously. So they also had other ways that they caught fish. But what about the ocean? What does the ocean offer these people?
Oh.
Yes? Oh,
Salmon?
well, salmon, yeah, but it's easier to get them in the stream. Much easier, yes?
Well, tuna?
Tuna. No. Tuna like warm water and they stay way out.
Oh,
Or they stay
come on.
way south, yes.
Clams?
Clams, yes. They used to have clams like this.
Shellfish.
Now they would go out into the water. You know how we have king tides this time of the year where it goes way out and then comes way in?
Yeah.
Well, when the tides would go way out, they'd go out with their little sticks and they would move the shellfish around, the pismo clams, because if they had enough room and the sand wasn't packed really tight, the clams would get bigger and reproduce. And we know that that's true because the National Park System told the Indians up in Northern California at Point Reyes, they said, you have to stop going out and messing around with the clam beds because we want them to naturally get bigger. And you guys are messing them up. So the Indians stopped and the clam beds disappeared. They were actually farming the clam beds. They also used to take those long sticks, and sedge plants grow near the water, and they would take the sticks and reach down underneath the mud and pull the roots out nice and straight, because the roots are all gnarly. That way they can make baskets with the roots when the roots were nice and straight. These people were working all the time. Okay, yes?
How do they make bow and arrows?
How do they make bow and arrows?
Yeah.
Really well.
What did they make them out of?
Well, they made the bows out of wood, okay? And they made the arrows out of bamboo that grows on the beach. So, this was made by a person who used to work at the Natural History Museum, who knows a lot about this kind of stuff. So we paid him to make some things to show you. This is the bamboo that grows on the beach. You can't find it very often. There's only one place around here that it's supposed to grow, and I've never been able to find it there. And then they'd also make this part out of just wood. And then they'd make, of course, the arrowheads. They could make them out of chert, which is a really hard rock here. Or they would trade with Indians that lived where there's obsidian. What's obsidian? What is it?
Please. I got
You had the answer and then you didn't, right? Who knows what obsidian is?
It's a rock that they used to like chip because it was softer.
It's not soft, it's very
It's
But where does it come from? That's what I want to know. Yeah?
It can be made from lava and water combining.
That's right. It comes from volcanoes. So where's the nearest volcano? Yes?
Hawaii.
Oh, and so do you think they walked to Hawaii to get No, and it's not the nearest by far.
Way closer.
Okay.
There's one way closer. I think it's, where is it? It's in. I know, it's L's right. Isn't L, is L already raising their hand? I can't. Yeah.
Okay. Where's the nearest volcano?
Isn't it like in Oregon or somewhere?
No, it's in California. How do you think we got those Sierra Nevada mountains? That's all that range is volcanic, okay? And it was pushed up because of volcanic activity. So where's the nearest volcano?
Nevada.
No, but it's near the Nevada state line, yes.
Yosemite?
In the Yosemite area, yeah, on the other side of Fresno, if you go up the mountains and over the other side, you get to Mammoth and June Lakes and all that. That's all very volcanic, and there used to be a humongous volcano over there that blew up and threw obsidian all over the place. Also by Clear Lake. So they traded with people that lived up there that wanted to come over here and eat clams.
My grandparents live in Clear Lake.
All right, so that's where one of those volcanoes was. And if up by Clear Lake is where the geysers are, you know, that white.
Yeah, I've seen one.
Okay, that's all volcano stuff. So these arrows were so cool that when they went hunting, if they shot a deer, this part would come off. You wouldn't have to break your arrow and make a new one, you'd get this part back. And when you clean the deer, you'd get this part back too. So, do you think that this would be a good point to shoot a bird with?
Yeah.
How many think yes? Raise your hands. How many think no? Okay, the no people, tell me why you think that this would be not good for a bird. Yes.
I saw there was a different arrow for a bird.
Good, all right. So they had a different tip for birds because this would go right through a bird. The bird would go, oh no, and fly away. And Indian would be running along and lose the bird. Bird would die, nobody would win. So they had an arrowhead for birds stuck out and out, fall down dead on the ground. And the Indian would pick it up and go, all right, dinner and feathers, I'm cool. So if you were going after rabbits, you would just have a really sharp piece of wood to get a rabbit because they're small. But if you were going after something really big, this wouldn't even be big enough. You'd have to have bigger arrowheads. So they could change arrowheads based on what they were hunting. They were pretty smart. Does anybody know about how they actually hunted deer? Yes?
They take a spear and then start shooting with it.
No?
Oh,
Yes?
they use a throwing spear.
They typically didn't use throwing spears, although they did have things like that. Yes? Harpoons? No, they used arrows. Okay. This is kind of important. So hands down. The night, did these guys take baths all the time?
No.
Why not?
Because
Yes?
there wasn't technology back then.
To take baths? Well, if they didn't take baths all the time, did they smell?
Yes.
Did they notice it?
No.
Why not?
Because I know, I actually know where you're going with this. I don't really know why they didn't do it, but they needed to smell a little bit dirtier so that the animal wouldn't smell the human coming.
Exactly the opposite. Yeah, so if you smell something bad, after a while your nose gets tired, okay? Because it's just like, how long can I smell this horrible stuff? So, you know, when they're walking around and they're kind of stinky, they didn't notice it. It's just like teenagers, you know. If they don't take enough baths, they smell pretty bad. They never notice it. You know, so if your mom or your teacher tells you you need to take more baths, just do it. So, what if they went hunting? The animals could smell them coming, so they took a bath the night before they went hunting. And the men would go into a sweat lodge, which was a building that they would basically build mostly underground with a curved roof over the top with hides and things. And they'd build a fire inside until it got really hot, and then they would sweat. They would also pray to the animals, saying, you know, I hope we have a good hunt tomorrow. We're sorry we're going to kill you, but we need to eat too, and there's no stores here. So then they would take things like antlers or sticks, and they would actually pull the sweat off of them and throw it on the ground. And then they'd run outside and jump in the river, because they were next to a river, right? And then they'd come out squeaky clean and not smell at all. They would put on deer clothes. So they took the skin that they took off of the deers and they put them on, including the head and the antlers. They'd walk out into the grass with the deer. And they were so good. They were so good. I'm telling this story. They were so good that they could walk right up to deer and the deer wouldn't even notice. There were Russian people here that came down to get fur seals because in Russia it was so cold they needed fur to stay alive. They saw the Indians hunt in the fields and they couldn't tell the difference between the deer and the Indians. Even if the Indians needed to kind of move a deer over, they could kind of give them the old hip because the deer didn't notice they were there. So they didn't stand up and shoot deer like this. They came up with little bows and underneath they shot them this way. Then the deer would fall over and the other deer would look around and go, what happened to you, Joe? Did they shoot as many deer as they could shoot, or did they just shoot as many as they needed? And why? And why?
They shot as many as they needed because they used every single part of the deer because they didn't want to waste it, and they didn't want to waste any of the deer parts because they believed that if you kill too much, then they're all going to run out. They're going to run out of the...
No. That's not the reason they didn't do it. But that's a great idea. Yes?
Maybe it's because if you like catch a deer and you don't really need it right now, maybe like overnight it'll get like moldy and it'll get gross and stuff.
Gross and stuff. So you didn't want a lot of gross and stuff laying around the village, right? So they didn't use more than they could eat or turn into jerky, which they did that kind of stuff too. Okay, because they needed to have protein, right? They didn't they didn't kill more than they needed because they had no refrigeration. They had no place to put meat where it wouldn't get bad. Did they wear many clothes?
No.
No. Okay, now why not? Why not? Why?
Maybe because it was hot.
Okay, is it hot today? Huh?
No, but maybe in the summer when it's all hot.
Is it really hot here in the summer? Is it really cold in the winter? No, this is the best place in the world to live. We have the best climate ever. Even today, it's just like, big deal. And besides, if you were walking around today and you were an Indian, would you put clothes on or would you be glad you didn't have any clothes on?
Clothes on. Clothes on.
Do you like wet clothes?
No.
Okay, so that's one reason not to wear clothes. Another reason is because if you wear clothes all the time, they didn't take baths. They had critters on them. You know, it's like, if you wore clothes all the time, your critters had a place to live, right? Okay, but remember, they only had one job to do every day. And what was that job? I already told you. What was that job?
Work
At what?
on hunting and...
On hunting, yeah, getting food. That's all they had to do. So if you had a choice between making clothes, which was really work, or playing games, which would you do?
Playing
games.
Yeah, there's always somebody who says that. You wouldn't work. Okay, sometimes you would work if you wanted something really special. But they did wear some clothes. I mean, this lady right here is obviously cold. She's wearing a rabbit skin cape that she made. She's wearing a tulle skirt, and she has deer skin wrapped around her. Okay? She's cold. That's why she's wearing that. This guy, what's he wearing? Yes?
He's wearing like a feather bottom. He looks pretty like warm because he has like barely anything on.
Yeah, he's wearing feathers, but is he trying to get warm? What is he doing? What is he doing?
Is he gonna get an animal?
No. Yes?
He kind of wants to be warm and cold.
No. What's he doing?
He's dancing.
He's dancing! Yes! He's at a party! They get dressed up to go to parties! Okay, so that's when they put their clothes on. They put fancy stuff on here. These guys are having a dance. Okay, these guys are hunting, so they're not wearing any clothes. Okay? These guys right here, these have already been to the mission, and the mission fathers, the priests said, you have to wear clothes. You're not allowed not to wear clothes. So after that, they had to wear clothes. You need to understand that making clothes, if you wanted to turn a deer skin into leather, what you would have to do is you would have to cut it off the animal first of all, to make the meat, okay? And then use the bones and things like that. Then you'd have to scrape with a sharp rock all the fat off the inside of the skin. Then you'd have to tie it up in a big wooden bow. You'd have to tie it and stretch it until it dried out for a month. Then you'd have to rub fat and oil back into the underside of the skin to turn it into leather. Sometimes you chew it so that the leather would be soft. And then if you wanted to make clothes, you'd have to take the intestines and you'd have to twist them into thread. And you'd have to make a needle out of bone, including putting a hole in it. And then you'd have to punch holes before you could even sew it together. Do you think you'd like to make clothes?
Yes.
You're so wrong.
I want to.
Okay, so that's my point. Yes?
So in the picture with the lady draining the stuff into the acorn powder stuff, she's wearing clothes. Has she already been
And
to
is
the
this a
picture?
photograph?
No, it's a drawing.
No, it's a photograph. So, she's a modern lady. She's a relatively modern lady. These are drawings, okay?
Okay.
And the people that don't have any clothes on, they're in drawings. Okay. So way back when they first met these people, how long do you think that the Indians lived here? Before we even got here. How long do you think they lived here?
Oh.
Yes.
Until 1850. No, until.
Not until, how far back? How long? You're not going to see it up there. Yes? Yes.
The 1500s?
Way before that. Yes.
The 1800s?
Who said 1,000 years?
I did.
Okay. They lived here between 3,000 and 6,000 years ago. Okay. How long has America been a country? How long has America been a country? United States of America. How long have we been here? How long have we been here?
100 years?
Twice that long.
Oh, 200 years.
Mm-hmm. Over 200, but less than 250. Okay? So, you think we've been here a long time. These guys were here forever. And they weren't the first people to come here. There's a campsite in Scotts Valley that's 12,500 years old. It's an Indian campsite. 12,500 years old. Okay, so these people were really good at what they did. Well, why do we call them Indians? Yes?
Because Columbus came and he was sailing to India, and he thought he sailed to India and he thought this was India, and he called the Native Americans Indians.
That's correct. With some minor adjustments. He thought he was going to the East Indies, which is close to India, but that's why it's called the Indies. Because that's where all the spices and silks and things like that that they traded for. And they thought that they could get there because the world was round, and they were trying that out. Some people already knew it was round, but he didn't know there was a whole continent, North and South America here. So when he got out of his boat, he said, "You must be Indians," and the name stuck. Okay, so where he landed, we now call the West Indies. It's half the world away from the East Indies where he was going. But Columbus named the Indians. And it's an okay name to call them, the name stuck. But Native Americans is a truer thing to call the people that were here when we first showed up. So the Spanish came here, and Queen Isabella and King Philip of Spain, which is where Columbus came from, had just won a war. They were fighting the Moors who were in Spain, and they came down and they kicked the Moors out. They had a war for a long time, and they were fighting over religion. It's the same problems that we still have today between Muslim and Christians, okay? So the king and queen were Christians, and they wanted everybody in the New World to become Christians so that they wouldn't become anything else. Well, all the people over here, they didn't have a religion other than that they believed in the goodness of the place where they lived, and they believed there were spirits and animals and things like that. So when the Spanish came, their job was to convert all of the Indians to become Christians. That was their job. So priests came along with the explorers. And remember, they had iron on their side, so it was pretty easy for them to come up here. And they established a mission. The first mission was in San Diego. The second mission was in Carmel. That's number 2.
How is that mission?
Yeah, it's a very cool mission. This mission here was the 12th. So they didn't just build them one after another. They jumped around, so you'll know that for next year's mission stuff, right? Yes?
My brother, when he was in 4th grade, he always drove to one of the missions. And also, doesn't like, when you're near a mission, don't you see like one of those valleys?
Sometimes. Some of the missions have fallen apart. But if you want to see the very best mission you can see, San Antonio, on the way down toward San Luis Obispo, it's almost perfectly like it was back when they first built it, because it's on an army base and there's no houses around. It's really cool. Yes?
I've seen 3 missions: the Carmel mission, the Santa Barbara mission, which is really like perfectly put together. But what's kind of scary is there's a mausoleum.
Mausoleum. Yeah, well,
And
tell this story
also
next year.
Last best
So they wanted the Indians to help them build the mission and to learn how to work and to farm and to do all that stuff that they thought was important. How did they get the Indians to come to the mission? They offered them something for free.
Oh,
What did they offer them? Yes.
iron maybe?
Nope, they wouldn't give them iron. Yeah?
Maybe, what's it called?
What's it called?
The,
Obsidian?
yeah, obsidian.
No. What was the only thing that the Indians needed every day?
Oh, acorn.
Yes?
Food?
Food. They offered them free food. The trouble is, if you ever sat down and ate the food with them, you could never leave. You could never leave on pain of death.
Yeah.
So they would even do things like kidnap kids so that their parents would come. They really wanted people to become Christian, and it seems wrong now, but at the time, it was very important to them. So it's pretty easy to judge them and say that was a bad thing to do, but at the time, it was the most important thing they could do. So what they did was, it was like a football team. If half the football team was gone, you wouldn't be able to play the game very well, would you? So they couldn't gather the food they needed. Plus, they didn't like the missions, and plus, the Spanish came and they had colds. The Indians had never had colds, and so they didn't have any defenses against getting a cold, and they would die from getting colds. So a lot of the Indians died off where they left. Within 10 to 20 years, there were no more Indian villages at all. It happened just like that. Yes?
Wasn't it smallpox?
Smallpox was, they used smallpox against the Plains Indians. They didn't use smallpox against the Indians in the Plains. Just, that's another whole story we don't want to get into. Smallpox is a really bad disease that kills people. Okay, so the Spanish come, they build the mission, they take all the land away from the Indians go away, And then something really amazing happened here. Does anybody know what the San Francisco 49ers is a football team? What does the name mean? What does the 49ers mean? Yes.
It's like the gold.
Gold. Yes, in 1848, they discovered gold in Sacramento. And in 1849, everybody around the world came here.
Gold
The gold rush! Yes. Okay, so
1849.
So remember, this was part of Spain once upon a time. We were Spanish. I mean, California was Spanish. The people that lived here were Spanish. After a while, the people in America who were Spanish colonies decided that they didn't like Spain taking all the gold and all the good stuff and not giving them anything in return. So they had wars of independence and became separate countries. And Mexico became a country on its own, and this became part of Mexico. Overnight, the people that lived here were changed from Spanish to Mexicans, okay? And when they did that, they took all the land away from the church and they gave it to the Mexican people who'd helped build this country up. And so they gave a ranch to Rafael Castro, 6,600 acres, all the way from Sea State Boulevard to Cabrillo College, and 2 miles inland. And they gave his sister Soquel, and they gave his father Rancho San Andreas from Seascape South. And they raised cattle. So there was probably 250 Mexicans living here, okay? They raised like 200,000 head of cattle. So if there was, let's just say that there was 10,000 cows on this ranch, and Rafael Castro had maybe, at the time, maybe 5 kids. What would they do with 10,000 cows? And don't say eat them, because that's not what they did. Why did they grow so many cows? Yes?
So the cows can have babies?
Well, the cows could have babies, but what's the point of having so many cows?
Trade.
Yes?
Trading milk.
Trading in milk. Well, they didn't need milk. But what did they trade? What part of the cow did they trade? Yes? The what? The leather. Leather, the skins, okay? So there were ships would come up the coast and they were Americans. They would come up here to get the leather. They would trade the Mexicans for nice dresses and silks and gold. And remember, there was no stores. Those little ships were the stores. It's like going to Costco. I need this and I need that. And you trade all your cow skins for them. And then they'd take them back to Boston and make shoes and all that kind of stuff out of it. Okay, so what happened to the meat? Now you're talking about 10,000 piles of meat laying here. What are you going to do with all the meat? What happened to the meat? Yes.
Trade.
Huh?
Trade them.
Trade what? To who?
Maybe they fertilized them?
No.
And ate them?
No.
Well, there were so many cows here that if you were riding through and you were hungry, you could kill a cow, eat a steak, and as long as you didn't take the leather, nobody cared. But so we're not talking about worrying about the meat, but there's 10,000 piles of meat laying on the ground here. What happened to it? Yes.
It decomposes and turns into fertilizer for the plants that they have on the ranch.
Yeah, but can you imagine what it smelled like?
Oh, God.
That's not what happened to the meat. Yeah, it smelled bad, you can bet. But what happened to the meat? Think about it. 10,000 pounds of meat laying in that parking lot over there. What happens to it? What happens? Yes?
Maybe the animals ate it.
That's right, the animals ate it. What kind of animals ate all that meat?
Oh.
Yes.
Deers and bears?
Deers don't eat meat. Bears. Bears eat the meat. Okay, back in those days, there were lots of bears here. Lots of bears here. Because the bears had so much to eat. There's black bears, which we still have in California. If you go to Yosemite, you're going to see a black bear because they raid the garbage cans. And if you have food in your tent at night, they'll come in and get it. still black bears here. And they're pretty impressive, right? But grizzly bears, they're also called brown bears. They're bigger than your car. They weigh a ton. A full-size male grizzly bear back then could stand right there and touch that ceiling.
Whoa.
Not over here, but over there. Okay? We're talking big, nasty bears. And it got to the point where he'd go out of the house and he'd go, oh, there's a bear! There's a bear! Oh, Judy got eaten on the way home from school today. That was a problem. So, they didn't have a lot of things they could do. I mean, the Spanish had guns that would shoot like one bullet, and that was all you had. And bears, grizzly bears, can take a bullet through the heart and still live for an hour. So, you know, you better be riding fast away if you shot a grizzly bear, because they're really dangerous animals. So, when the gold rush happened, and all these people came, they brought repeating rifles and poison, and they fast as you could go, because grizzly bears are very powerful meat. Very serious threats. Today we have guns that will stop a grizzly bear cold. Really big, powerful guns. Okay. We got to get through a couple more things before I turn you loose, okay? Yes?
How do you know all of this stuff?
I'm so smart.
Yes, sure.
Because I've been collecting this stuff for a business that tries to help our other businesses be successful. And so when we were in Redwood Village, which is a historic place too, a friend of ours gave us this picture. And this is the old Aptos train station. And it was such a cool picture, we put it on the wall. And people would walk in and say, oh, that's cool, where's that? And we'd say, well, it's gone. I have some old pictures, and that's how we started collecting all of this stuff. And little by little, I learned all the tales, okay? Nobody just sat me down and said, you have to read this, we're going to have it. I'll tell you that very thing next. Yes?
What happens when the Indians die? Like, what did the other Indians do?
Well, around here, usually what they did is they built, they took sticks, and they created almost like a bunk bed up high, and they would put the body on the bunk bed and let it decompose over time, and then probably bury the bones. There was an Indian burial ground over near Spreckels Drive, and we're getting ahead of ourselves. This is Klaus Spreckels, and he built a giant hotel over there. And while he was building the hotel, they found all the bones, because that's kind of where the Indian village was. And they moved all of those bones over to the back side of this little cemetery right here. Because that's where Castro is buried. He gave that cemetery, and he's there, and his wife's there. And this guy right now, and he started the very first general store and post office in Aptos. And it's still there. It's that little white building that's on Wharf Road, right next to the glass shop. You know where Uncle Quox is? That building is the very first
I go there all the time. That's where music
the
shop
old,
is.
yes, that's the oldest building in Aptos. Okay? And so after the railroad came, he moved his business over and he built the Bayview Hotel. So that's the guy who built the Bayview Hotel. And he's buried over there too.
I have a little trivia for you guys. Mrs. Davis, 4th grade teacher, she's related to Castros. So if you're in her class next year, you can ask her about that.
Okay, so when the gold rush happened, people came over here and they spent lots of money buying equipment and food and stuff like that, and then they go, because Sacramento's up against the mountains, and the Sierra Nevadas is where the gold comes from. So they all went over there trying to get gold, right?
Yeah.
Most of them didn't find gold, and some of the ones that found gold, people killed them so they could get their gold. So getting gold wasn't the way people got rich. Who do you think got the richest? Who were the richest people from the gold rush?
I know. The people that didn't get the gold.
Yeah, and what people were those? I mean, how did they get rich? How did they get rich? No, you don't stand up. I'm calling on people that aren't going. Okay. If you haven't raised your hand before, this is your chance. Yes?
I have already used my hand before.
It's okay. Who got rich? How did they get rich? Yes?
they got some of the people that sold the things that the miners
That's
needed.
right, the
Yeah,
merchants
I
got
was-
rich. So, Klaus Spreckels was one of those people. He came over here from Germany, and everybody was fleeing all the countries. One reason was because there was a recession and a depression in most of the world at that time. So people were poor, and they came here to get rich. He came to South Carolina, and he went to work in a grocery store. And within 2 years, he owned the grocery store. Then he married Klaus Mangel's sister, and they came out to California, and they started a sugar factory, and they started a brewery, so they made beer and sugar. And this guy was so smart. Everything he touched, he got rich. So the guys who sold food made money. So he invented granulated sugar, because you used to get sugar in a cone, and you had to have a file. If you wanted sugar in your cereal, you had to file it onto your cereal. So he invented granulated sugar and sugar cubes. And it used to take 3 weeks to make brown sugar into white sugar, because it took a long time to dry. And he got it down to where it only took 2 days to make brown sugar into white granulated sugar. So all the other sugar companies went out of business. He's still the 40th richest man in American history. And he lived in San Francisco, but he bought Aptos as a ranch to raise racehorses. He began to raise racehorses. So he built a giant hotel down on Spreckels Drive, which is why it's called that. And it had horse barns, and it had a bowling alley, and it had a Treasure Island was a place where people walked around, you know, Lover's Lane. And it had horse barns out here. These are pictures of them. And it was the most beautiful hotel on the California coast. So where he lived was about where Rio Del Mar Boulevard is today. And this is a drawing of his house. And so we call the Polo Grounds. He didn't play polo there. He owned all of this stuff. He had a racetrack there.
What?
And that's why later they played polo there, because it was the perfect place. But he had a racetrack for his horses. And he would come down here in the summer. Okay? So it used to be that the only way you could get goods and services in and out of this place was by ship. So we used to have a wharf. I always miss this. We used to have a wharf right where Aptos Creek is today, because later on they shoved dirt into where the estuary was and moved the creek over. But the wharf was there, and ships would come in. But big storms would break up the wharf, so they wanted to have a railroad. So he and Fred Heen brought the railroad here. Okay? Yes?
What is that sign on the wall here?
What's the what?
That little sign on the wall.
This?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's that thing.
Okay,
they put
this
on
is a
horses.
branding iron. Remember they had 10,000 cows? Well, in order to tell your cow from your brother's cow, you would take this iron, and this one has an A on the bottom of it,
Oh yeah.
but this was Rafael Castro's brand.
Oh I know.
You heat this up in a fire until it's
Yeah.
almost red hot, and you tie the cows up, so they're laying on the ground going, what am I doing here? And you take it and you singe the hair on their behind
Yeah.
until it leaves a scar that looks just like that. And for the rest of their life, well, they didn't like it, but eventually it healed. But for the rest of their life, you knew that was your cow. That's a branding iron.
Yeah.
Okay? Yes?
So I ride horses,
Okay.
and now I was looking up there, and that's a polo. They're doing polo, and also about the branding iron. Now they do it on horses too, to tell that it's my horse.
Mhm.
And sometimes they think that it actually doesn't hurt the horse as much as putting it in a fire than putting it on ice.
That would work too.
So they tie the horse up and they stick it in ice and they put it on their butt.
And it still leaves a mark, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes?
I know. So in the gold rush, there's also this man, John Sutter.
He's the one who found it.
Yeah, and so he got the jar to this one salesman, and he put it against
It was actually, Sutter owned the mill where they
Yeah.
found it, and John Marshall worked for him, and he's the guy
Yeah.
who found it.
Yeah.
Yes.
and then
So-
he spilled it the beans at the guy. Oh.
Yeah. So we talked about people who made money, right? And some of you saw this potato shovel. Well, Judge Blackburn lived in Santa Cruz, and he knew that if you took a potato, you could stick it in your pocket for a month, go out to the gold fields, and when you were hungry, you could take it out and you could put it in the coals of a fire for a half an hour and then take it out and eat it, right? And it would be perfect. It didn't need refrigerators. If you had a little milk, that would make a perfect meal. The Irish lived for hundreds of years on just potatoes and milk. So he planted a whole bunch of potatoes and then he sold them to the miners. And this is a potato shovel because they grow underground. So what you do is you dig them up, all the dirt falls away, and you got the potatoes. So he made a fortune selling potatoes to the miners because back then, you know, things get more expensive all the time. Back then you could buy a meal for a nickel.
What? That's a lot.
A nickel, 5 cents. You could buy a meal for 5 cents. When the gold rush happened, you could buy a piece of bread with butter on it for $1.50. And a potato was $1. So if he sold 1,000 potatoes, he made $1,000. If he sold 10,000 potatoes, he made $10,000.
Oh my goodness.
But pretty soon everybody planted potatoes, and then the price fell, and then nobody wanted potatoes, and so for 10 years, Santa Cruz County smelled like rotten potatoes. Okay, I have a couple more things I want to show you, and then I'm going to let you walk around. The only thing you can't touch is this, okay? Because it's easy to break. Also, you want to know about fur? The Indians didn't have places where they could buy anything, so animals would wash up dead, and just like this one washed up dead on the beach. This is an otter skin. The Indians would... Yes, it's sad, but it happened. Stuff happens. So when these wash up on the beach and they're dead, they take them to the aquarium because it's illegal to possess otter skins or otters unless you have a permit. And the only way you can get a permit is if you have a museum. So I got a permit to have an otter skin so you can see it. These are the kinds of things the Indians would sleep on, so they had a nice bed. So this is the softest fur in the world. There's more than 1 million hairs in 1 square inch of this right here. So otters, the Russians came and they killed fur seals and otters, which is why there's so few otters left. Because they would freeze to death if they didn't have fur in Russia. So these otters no longer come ashore. They almost never come up on shore because they're afraid of people. So this skin is so rich, this fur is so rich that they can just, you can see them doing this all the time because they're trying to get air inside the fur to keep themselves warm. But you're allowed to touch this, and that's why we have it at the museum, so we can touch this later. And you know what they made their boats and stuff out of, right? What is it?
Tule.
Tule. Okay, so this is a piece of tule. It's really strong this way, but it's really flexible this way after you dry it out, and it's filled with air pockets, so it floats, and it's easy to make things like houses out of it. And
Oh yeah.
And Klaus Spreckels' house burned down, but Klaus Mangel's house is still here. It's a private residence near the entrance to Nicene Marks. And a lot of the stuff that we have came from that house. And one of the things that we have is this beanbag toss. You know, people still play that game, right? Okay, but this one's 100 years old, and you'll be able to play it later. But the deal is you can't throw it because you'll break it, and you'll break these. So beanbag toss, you just toss it gently, and you get the points for the hole you go through, okay? So afterwards, when I let you walk around, you can play this game. So I want you to do me a favor. What we're going to do is, without talking, stand up. Without talking. Now, without touching anything on the boat, raise your hands over your head and take a big deep breath. Okay? Okay, hold it, hold it, hold it. Just keep holding it. Okay, put your hands down and come over here, and we're almost done. But what they did was they ran the railroad up into the forests and up into Nicene Marks. That was the town of Loma Prieta, and that was a lumber mill. And then this guy, Fred Heen, right here, he ran a railroad up into Valencia. And you know Valencia Road that goes by Valencia School? That was built as a railroad so that they could cut all the trees down in the forest. And here's a picture where we're standing in the middle of what is the freeway today, and there's the Bayview Hotel. And look at this mountainside. There's no trees left on it. There's just like 6.
Oh.
Okay, if they cut down all the trees, and they did, how come there's redwood trees up there today? Yes?
Because they planted them. Some
No,
people
they
planted
did
them.
not. Yes,
Oh, well, what happened is they didn't take out the roots, so it grew back.
that's right. But what's so amazing is, if you cut down that tree right there, it's dead. You cut down a redwood tree, it comes back.
What?
And it's rare. It's very rare that you find a tree that comes back. So the trees up in Nicene Marks, they're babies. They're like 100 years old. And a redwood tree is not an adult until it's 800 years old. Okay? So those are little baby trees up there. There's only a few trees that are older, that are really old, and they're 1,000 years old or more. Yes?
In Nicey Marks, there was a tree that just fell down that was 1,000 years
It was
old.
1,000 years old, yeah. And I'll bet you if they cut that tree open, it might even be older than that. They could count the rings, because there's a ring every year. Yes?
I went to Redwood Forest with my dad once, and then we were reading this little sign, and when a tree becomes dead, out from like where the roots are, like babies will go surround it, and then like the what do you call it, the stump, it'll like go away, and then the trees will just go up again, and then it'll die, and it'll keep going up and up.
The babies race each other to the sun. And the ones that get the tallest, the little ones that are in the shade, they die, and the big ones just keep going. So that's how you get those rows of trees. So this guy was so smart that after they cut all the trees down, he had the lumberjacks dynamite the stumps. Listen. He had the lumberjacks dynamite all the stumps and plant apple trees. Okay, that's why we have apple stuff around here. And for the next 50 years after that, they sent their apples to the market on his railroad, so he still made money. The guy was a genius. He was the first millionaire that was made in Santa Cruz County. So he owned all of the Valencia area. And so you see boxes of apples here. So the pretty apples, the pretty sweet apples, they sent all over the world. And Watsonville at the time, listen, Watsonville at the time was the apple capital of the entire world. There was more than 1 million apple trees in Watsonville. And so they sent apples everywhere. That was about 50 years worth. So now if all the pretty apples get sent out as eating apples, what happens to all the ugly apples? Yes?
You use the seeds in the plant?
No, they didn't need to, because oddly enough, if you plant an apple seed, you won't get the same apple. It's weird. So you have to graft apples if you want the same exact apple. You have to take a part of one tree and put it on another tree. So what do they do with the ugly apples? Yes?
They decompose in the soil.
No.
They just let them fall off the tree.
And?
And
They used everything. What did they do with them? Yes?
they turned it, they had seeds, and the apple turns back into another apple tree.
No. Okay, what they did with them, have you ever had Applejack cereal where there's little bits of dried apples? Oh. So the ugly ones, they dried because there was no refrigerators, right? So what they did was they had machines like this, and that machine, this is a smaller version, you'd put the apple on this sharp little part right here, and then this is a razor blade, and what it would do is it would take the skin off the entire apple, just that fast, and this little sharp part right here would take the core out, and then they would slice them all up into little pieces, and they would put them in an apple dryer, which is a big building that used to be in Aptos Village, and the Chinese used to run this because it was such hot, dirty work. But they had the floor of the building had crisscrosses like this. It was wooden, and there was a fire under the floor, and the heat would rise up through the apples, and the guy like this with a big shovel would turn the apples over, and after 12 hours they'd be little bits. And then they took the skins and the seeds and the cores and they turned them into vinegar. Okay, so they used everything. Well, after Spreckels died, he died in 1908, all of this land was getting sold off for houses and stuff like that. So two groups of people got together and they decided that they were going to turn this into a resort. So if you look at Rio del Mar right here, it was first called Aptos by the Sea, and then they changed the name to Rio del Mar. This is where the freeway is today. That was the entrance gate, and this big yellow piece came off the entrance gate. It used to be where the people walked through. So if you look at this picture over here, there's a giant hotel up on the bluff where the condominiums are. That's Rio del Mar Boulevard, where the red is. And that's the Sea Breeze, and that's the Esplanade. And they also pushed the river over and turned it into a giant swimming pool. So here's the giant swimming pool, and they had a changing room that you could go to. And there was a beach club, and the golf course was originally from Rio del Mar. But the trouble is they had a Great Depression where everybody lost all their money, and so they couldn't afford to sell the lots anymore. So it was a real problem. And then World War II came along, and it made it even worse. So they weren't very profitable until the 1960s. The same time in Seacliff, they were going to build this great big pier. See this picture over here? 500 feet out into the ocean, 1,000 feet across, with a dance floor and a restaurant and all kinds of stuff. And so many big storms came in and they took everything off the beach that they couldn't afford to do that. So they bought a concrete oil tanker. And you ask what it's made of? It's made of cement and puffed brick, and it has iron in it to keep it together. So it's really concrete, but it's been called the cement ship for so long that we still call it that. They brought it in and they backed it up on the sand, they parked it on the sand, and then they opened the valves in the bottom and sunk it right onto the sand, and then they fitted it out as a dance hall. They built up on the sides of the oil tanker and made it into this dance floor, and they had a restaurant, and they had a midway where you could get candy and go fishing and do stuff, and they had gambling down below decks. And this was it started out during Prohibition when there was illegal booze and people were partying all the time. So 2 years later, a big sea storm came in and broke it in half, and they went bankrupt. And that's what happened to the cement ship. So there's lots of other amazing stories about Aptos. But what I'm going to do now is let you walk around and look at stuff.